today.
And then, fear spread across the country, eventually targeting scores of daycare centers. But the story that initially fed the panic was not all it seemed. In the summer of 1983, a 39-year-old mother called the Manhattan Beach Police Department and accused McMartin teacher Raymond Buckey of molesting her 2.5-year-old son.
In the DA's office, all kinds of doubts developed, particularly about the fact that the mother of the first complaining child was psychotic, but they just kept on going. It was like the Titanic. It was like a roller coaster or a ship that just was out of control and couldn't stop.
The police released Buckey for lack of evidence, but then they sent out this letter to some 200 families, instructing them to question their children about sodomy, oral sex, and fondling.
What happens then is the parents start to talk to their kids, and then they start to talk to each other, and then they start to compare notes, and pretty soon emotionally involved parents are engaging in leading and suggestive questioning of their child.
I never understood why Manhattan Beach Police Department didn't deeply investigate her. Okay, it was not done. And had it been done then, I wouldn't be talking about the case. It would never have been filed.
Good evening, this is Cheryl Merrill, and it's Labor Day weekend on a Monday, September 2nd, 2019, and it's been a couple decades now since the McMartin case in Manhattan Beach, California, that was one of the biggest cases ever of its kind, and I was in the middle of it there when I was living in that area, Manhattan Beach, and at the time actually I was living in Torrance. But then I eventually moved to Manhattan Beach. And I was very aware of it. You know, I saw Raymond Buckey, the accused, in the Good Earth restaurant there during the court case. It was a very long court case. It lasted I think it was 2 or 3 years. And I spoke with the child psychologist who was involved in the area, in the case. And all I can say is this, that I figured out a long time ago that the reason this case happened was because of, even before that they were not, found not guilty. When I heard that the police sent a letter to the parents before any investigation on anything, and they created panic with this letter, asking them to ask their children about oral sex, and when I heard that, I knew that this was a police operation back then. I even knew that back then. Because, you see, when you understand how these police departments work, back then in the 70s and the 80s especially, these police officers didn't make much money. So they're thinking of ways of creating a lot of hype over cases to, in my opinion, to bring in overtime for their officers. Okay, I would do a jury trial here in San Francisco where I was not selected for the jury, but I got to see what was going on in this case, and I came to the conclusion, even in that one here in San Francisco, that they create these cases to be long, laborious, so they can make overtime. But these cases are jack. I'm not going to say it. They're just jack. They're nothing. Okay, when I saw what was going on, they had 300 jurors to choose from, and it was a long, laborious thing. It was going to last for 3 months, they said, of jurors coming part-time. And they had a pregnant woman they chose who was about to give birth. They're so cruel. And the reason they did this was to give these police officers overtime, because you can tell from the long list of everyone who participates in their cases, in the casework, that they put in long hours to these things. And they're absolute garbage. These cases that they choose to go for are absolutely garbage. There's nothing to them. Okay, they don't have to work hard at all. Okay, this case in San Francisco was about a former Vietnam vet and police officer. I believe he was a former police officer as well, and his son, who were growing a couple of 24 cannabis plants, marijuana plants on his property, and they had an unused rifle that was on the property. And they had, it was never reported in the police report that he had a certificate granting for medical purposes or something, that he could have these for himself. He wasn't selling it. And after all that, the jury excused it because the police officer deliberately neglected to reveal that he had a certificate to do this. Okay, and that's what they put this jury through. A long-winded trial case for this former Vietnam vet and his son. They were Asian Americans. And when I saw what they were doing, I was just so infuriated. A pregnant woman had to take out time in her precious life prior to giving birth to sit on this jury. And they could have cared less about the people on the jury, what they put these people through, because they wanted overtime. I swear, it makes no sense at all that they would just deliberately overlook the certificate that granted him the legal right to have it, and that they kept going after him. The DA kept going after them, even though they said, well, we have the certificate here, and they still ignored it, and they went after the gun. They were concerned about the gun that was never used, you know. And so I'm telling you that that's what I've been noticing that the police departments are doing. And I think there's plenty of evidence this McMartin case was started because Manhattan Beach Police Department saw and took full advantage of a complaint that came from a psychosis, mentally ill woman, and she was an alcoholic, and she was falsely accusing Raymond Bucky of molesting her son. And that caused the police to send out a letter. They researched Raymond Bucky, and they didn't have to find any evidence on him. So after that, the police sent out a letter to all these parents, causing fear and panic, having them start analyzing their children. And it eventually went to this professional therapy group called CCI or something, and it was determined that they were actually they were rejecting the answers of the children. That's when they said no, they weren't molested. No, they kept probing and putting peer pressure. Well, your other friend said this, so are you really going to be that stupid and say that, you know, why don't you admit it, kind of thing. That this is what the psychologists were doing, these counselors are doing. And they came to the conclusion that they were just planning in their subconscious, and then they started believing their lies, you know. So my thing is that my thing here is that I know the police are diabolical, and it's about money, and they made a lot of money on this case. Okay, they made a lot of overtime on it. They got everyone involved in their community, panic, and it spread to other police departments in all over California, and then it went national. That all this paranoia started. It made a lot of money for police. Okay, so I'm even suggesting that when they got this complaint from this lady, that they realized, well, we've got a gold mine here. If we can prove that there's this satanic ritual abuse at this preschool, this is going to be big for our overtime. We're going to do a lot of research here. So they took this completely out of context, did not investigate this woman at all for her background. They just took whatever she said. And I've witnessed that too, how anyone can say anything about you. They won't research them. They don't care. They want the easy case. They want the overtime to work on, whatever it takes, you know, to get extra money. And so that's been my experience for a long time. Now, during this whole process of this case, you know, they had this California Golden State Rapist on the loose, and that they needed something new to distract from that because they didn't catch him, you know, and he was a cop. They didn't catch him, so they need to start triggering new stuff, and you know, the panic and mass hysteria. They need something new. I mean, the Golden State Rapist stopped his activities in '86, so they needed something new. So they took whatever this crazy woman who called in said, and they didn't investigate her or her background, and they didn't really care. They just wanted the money. And when they sent out this letter to parents, I knew that this was a police psy-op. I knew it. Okay, they don't care who, because they're into S&M, they're into sadomasochism, and they're cruel people. they're not here to protect us. The Supreme Court has already ruled they're not. They don't care who they put out. You know, when you put a pregnant woman on the jury for your lousy, stinking case, just so you can make overtime to falsely accuse a former Vietnam vet who had a certificate to have medical marijuana plants there, when you do that and you go to that extent so you can make some extra OT, well, we know how sick your organization is, your police organization is. It's not about justice. It's not about protection. It's all about you and your money, because you claim you don't make enough money. Okay, we know that. We know that. We see it time and time again. In Los Angeles, one of the reasons why I left was because of these police psyops popping up everywhere. Okay, so the next thing that happened was the Rodney King case. You know, the Rodney King case, we witnessed it all for all of us to see, the riots that happened because these police couldn't control themselves, okay? The next thing we witnessed was O.J. Simpson, and the police screwed up that case, so they couldn't get to him right away. He was obviously the person who did it. We all know he had a civil case filed against them that they won because they were able to say that, yeah, he did murder those people, and I think at some time he did admit that he murdered those people. And so the next thing was the hype of the O.J. Simpson thing. These cops are into hype and mass hysteria to lies coming from the children because they wouldn't accept their answers.